Yes, it came true, my prediction. I really get a kick out of watching my predictions come true. People accuse me saying, you make predictions, but none come true. People think if I say something and it doesn't happen immediately, it's a failure. That's just really funny. But I point out things, trends that will come true in a year or a year and a half. And when Putin came to power, I said that he would definitely raise the value added tax. And at the time, it seemed like such an unlikely prediction, but last time around it actually happened. And they didn't just raise it from 20 to 21 as I predicted, but straight to 22, because the money situation is really bad. And of course, this will lead to higher prices and faster inflation. In general, the year 2026 is a year that poses a serious threat to Russians of a major acceleration in inflation and rising prices. Apparently, in the first quarter alone, prices for many goods will go up by about 15%. That's no small thing, and it will only get worse from there. So overall, the situation is such that all of this, it's being set up to collect more money for the budget, to rob the population. Many Russians say, I'm not involved in the war. I'm not financing the war. That's a very strange position to me. If you pay taxes, that means you're participating in the budget. There's no special war tax. But you pay taxes into the budget, and the budget takes money for the war from your tax payments. What's the problem? Yes, almost 40%. That's the situation we've ended up with today, which is why they're raising all the taxes. For 3 years now, Russia has been continuously tightening its tax system, constantly raising taxes. Sometimes they even introduce extraordinary taxes, like a one-time tax on windfall profits, and they force the company to pay. If your company's profitable, then pay up. So these are just completely insane measures. But there's no money for the war. And so 2026 is shaping up to be, how should I put it, a pretty scary year for Russia, because the financial situation in 2026 is unclear to anyone. It's just not clear to anyone. The documents, all the financial paperwork, it's all fake, worthless, meaningless. They don't mean anything. They don't prove anything. They don't convince anyone. These are absolutely bogus documents, adopted just for the sake of having something on paper, but they don't mean that anything will actually happen. And where Putin will get money for the war in 2026 is completely unclear. Of course, he's robbing the population in every possible way, but it's still not enough money. That's why we don't know how Russia will make it through 2026, or whether the Russian state might start to crack as early as 2026 because there's a severe shortage of money in the budget. Yeah, especially since they're also taking money from the housing and utilities budget to fund the military industrial complex. The winter is incredibly harsh, and Ukrainian drones are now even reaching critical transformers, effectively cutting off power. Not only do Russian drones hit Ukraine, but Ukraine responds in kind with its own strikes. They're also letting Russians feel just how much they love their brotherly nation.
There's basically no money to rebuild, to be honest. The
This is a really interesting situation. The thing is, there's a tricky setup in Russia. Look, housing and utilities is generally a spear funded at the local or regional level. You get it, right? But Russia doesn't have money for that. And when an accident happens, the money for repairs comes from the federal budget. That's why for regional authorities, these attacks, these disasters, they're a godsend. They get budget money for this. But the budget needs to have federal funds for it. Let me repeat that. You're in a situation where there's absolutely no money. Right now, the main question is whether Russia will spend the remaining money from the National Wealth Fund this year or not. There are only 4 trillion left, while the deficit at the end of last December was 7 trillion.
so
It's not even clear if that will be enough for 2026. If the entire National Wealth Fund is just spent, no one knows if it'll be enough to cover the deficit. In other words, the situation is unpredictable. It's actually pretty funny. In recent weeks, the Russian press has started throwing mud at Russia's finance minister, Siluanov. He used to be their miracle hero, saving the Russian economy from disaster, but by the end of 2024, he's turned into just another villain. They're trashing him, saying he doesn't understand anything at all and can't predict a thing. And that's because, well, look, he made the budget for 2025, approved it in November 2024, and it had a projected deficit of 1.2. By the end of the year, the deficit was 7.3, 6 times higher. So then the outcry started. What kind of finance minister can't predict his own deficit a year ahead, can't manage the finances? And honestly, the poor guy, I even feel a bit sorry for him. He can't manage it because there's a war going on. He's got insane expenses that he just can't predict. He doesn't know how many accidents will happen in Russia's utilities sector or how many drone strikes there will be. And all of that will need some kind of help and repairs. So in that sense, he's basically just managing a runaway BKOP. And of course, he can't predict it. But the problem is he can't plug those holes. He doesn't have the money. His oil and gas revenues are dropping because the price of oil is falling. As of today, it's dropped below 40%. The oil shipment price is a complete disaster. They budgeted for this in 2026. 59. And by the way, Russia's forecast up to 2042 shows it staying stable until 2042. The price of Russian oil is $69 per barrel. Absolute fantasy. I'm telling you, these are fake documents they're approving. Do you really think there are serious professionals sitting there? It's just crooks making fake documents. And Russians believe they actually have a government. Yeah, right.
Classic. Let's talk about oil in more detail then. We haven't seen each other in, well, not that long, but in that time, the whole Venezuela story happened. Maduro's arrest, the arrest of shadow fleet tankers, and so on. And oil dropped below $40. So basically, Trump is waging his own war, and it's affecting the Russian economy, which in turn could mean the breakup of Russia, like we discussed earlier, as we said. And so, in this chain, military action could potentially reach a definitive conclusion, and the complex and extensive process of geopolitical reshuffling will gradually start to unfold.
Look, Kettle, I just shift the emphasis a bit. Trump isn't waging war against Russia. He's fighting for the oil market, and Russia just happens to be losing in this war. That's about it. So the priorities are a bit different. I don't think he's particularly concerned about the fate of Russia or even Ukraine. That's just not the point. What he needs is to expand the market for American oil production. And he is systematically destroying the Russian oil industry, systematically depriving Russia of oil revenues, and working to push Russia out of the global oil market at all. I said this would happen sometime around 2023, and people laughed at me, saying, "You don't understand anything. Without Russia, the global oil industry will die. The oil market will collapse, prices will go crazy, and no politician will allow that. No one will give up Russian oil. Are you out of your mind?" Well, time goes on, and my predictions are coming true. For Russia, this is a pretty scary topic. But what can you do? That's just how it is. Look, Russia is losing the oil market because everyone is trying to take that market for themselves. The Americans are doing this very consistently. In the end, let's just state the facts. They've completely pushed Russia out of the European market. They forced Europe to sign a 5-year commitment to buy American oil and gas. They're putting a lot of pressure on them. They're putting pressure on Turkey, and it's working. Turkey is now refusing Russian gas, extending contracts for only 1 year, not the usual 5, as they're buying more LNG from the US. So there's a lot of pressure, and now they're putting pressure on India too. As you know, they just introduced these additional tariffs of 25%. Basically, they're just kicking Russia out of the oil market to take its share in global trade for American oil companies. And the fact that Russia is collapsing as a result, well, that's just a nice side bonus, nothing more.